Welcome, everyone. We're going to get this started. Let's just give it a minute for people to load in. All right, things are still loading. We'll give it a moment. All right, I think we're good to get started. A little bit on the housekeeping side of things. We've got the chat open to everyone. If you just want to have a fun discussion, that would be great. If you want to ask questions that get answered by us, or that we can at least get back to you if we don't have an answer, let's use the Q&A that allow us to track it, and it allows me to get Sai in on those questions at the right time throughout this webinar. With that, I'll pass it on to Sai.
Hello, welcome. A little bit about me. You've been here before, you already know, but for those who haven't, I'm Sai. I have over 12 years of experience in the MSP field. The last 4 years focusing on cybersecurity. I joined Augment in November 2025, and I enjoy escape rooms and board games. Really like solving problems, which transfers a lot over to technical stuff. So today, we're going to go into a couple different topics. If you've been in the webinar series, some of this is kind of repetitive, but more in depth. If you haven't checked those out, check out the other 3 episodes. They have a lot of great information for you. But we'll be focusing more on kind of real world use cases like password lapse, updating applications, implementing some Office configurations, and controlling Windows updates through Intune.
Oh, we have our first important question. What's your favorite board game?
It's my favorite board game. Oh, I love code names. It's a party game though. Uh, but if I like an actual board game, there's a nice one called Betrayal at House on the Hill. It's a different game every time you play, so it's always fun.
Nice.
Spooky. Yeah. Security and support features are things that we'll talk about. So, with Intune specifically, you have Intune deployed out. Some of the things we'll talk about here are going to be how you can use Intune to support your staff and implement some security settings, just some baselines, focusing more on the passwords. Again, updates and configurations. We'll go over the software updates, Windows updates, Edge updates, and some Office configuration settings, as well as real-world examples sprinkled throughout this presentation. So we'll start with LAPS. So LAPS is Local Administrator Password Solution. This comes back to Active Directory. It's an older solution that Microsoft came up with, and it was a solution to the issue of, you need a local admin password from time to time on a device to make changes and support your installations or the troubleshooting. But having one single password for all your devices that was the same across the board, not very practical or secure. If that got leaked, now someone has the keys to your whole kingdom. So Microsoft came with this option, LAPS, which is a rotating password schema. Basically, each device has their own unique password. It rotates periodically. And they recreated it in Intune, where you can now utilize it in Intune as well. It's the same feature and functionality. And so we're going to go into how to configure that and set that up. Again, great use case, like I mentioned, is like if you have technicians that need to support, like log into a machine locally to install an application or maybe escalate a privilege to make a configuration change, this is the way you would do it. And in some cases, you may be locked out where you can't remote to the machine. You might want to give that end user the local admin password to complete a step to get you access. By utilizing LAPS, it's more secure because even though they have that local admin password, you can rotate it like on the back end, and so that once they've used it the one time, they won't have access to it after the fact. So let's go into how we set that up. So we're going to log into Intune, and the first step that we'll want to go over, some housekeeping stuff here, is we covered this before, but if we go to Entra and devices, by default, when a device joins Intune, the user who joins Intune will have admin rights. So some things you'll want to configure, and we did cover this previously, but just to go over it again, in device settings, you get to control that behavior. You get to control who can join Entra, whether it's all users or selected users. If you want to enforce MFA, you can, how many devices that a user can register singularly. But here's the main thing. So global admin roles as a local admin, that's typically most people have that enabled just because you can use a global admin to do both. That's your call if you want to do that or not. If you want to be more granular, you want to turn that off. But this is the setting we're talking about. Registering user is added as a local administrator on device during Microsoft Intune join. So by default, it's set to all. So that means if I'm John at a company, you guys give me a laptop and I'm signing in to join Intune, my regular profile, John, is now an admin for the device, which we typically don't want. So best practice is to set that to none. Maybe you want to select certain exceptions, like maybe only your help desk staff get admin rights by default, even though I recommend you don't have admin rights as default, even if you're like an IT person. It's better to have a secondary admin account. That way you're just day-to-day user isn't that admin. So you set that to none. That would be the first step. And then here you can enable the Entra Labs password. So you hit yes. This is just one step. You have to actually configure the policy in Intune. So you do these settings and you hit save at the top here. Once you've done that, Intune is now capable of doing it. You now have to go configure the setting. We go back to Intune. Intune, we will go to devices. We're going to go to configuration and we're going to create a policy once it loads. New policy. These are for Windows 10 and later devices. And we're going to go to the settings catalog. The settings catalog replaces kind of like administrative templates. That's kind of like your starting place for most of your policies you're going to create. To all this demo lapse. We'll hit next, and we'll add settings. So in here, there's all the settings you can find. We can just search for lapse. And there we have administrative templates. That's archived, no longer a thing, but still categorized here as such, lapse. We can add this to the category and we get to configure that. So first step is, do we want to use lapse? Yes, we will enable that setting. Do not allow password expiration time longer than required by the policy. You can have that enabled. Basically, you get a set of password expiration. So by default, it's another thing we'll go into is password settings, which is covered in the previous seminar as well. But you get to choose password policies and when device expires and the character settings. So you can choose whether this adheres to that policy or it bypasses that policy. So that's the setting there. Password settings you can enable and you get to choose the age of the passwords. Like maybe you want it only every day it's a new password. Maybe it's 10 days. You get to choose that format and the complexity that gets enabled. By default, it goes to the most complex, which is ideal. And then password length, you can increase that if you want to. And then you get to choose which admin account gets managed. If you don't select this, by default, it's going to go with the local administrator account. Best practice for security is to disable the local administrator account, create a new one. So we want to enable this and kind of choose which administrator account we're going to manage. We'll go over the other password policy here shortly, just as a recap from the previous session. But ideally, you're just determining which admin accounts are created, and you get to choose. So for this scenario, we'll say like AM, department managed, and then admin. So we'll say that's our admin template. Maybe you have a different one for your clients, but don't leave it as just a regular administrator because typically best practices and other policies will have that disabled. Once this looks good, we'll hit next. You can scope it if you want to. This is more for tagging. And you choose assignments. You can add all devices. You can choose the groups. Again, we covered in previous sessions. It's best practices to kind of create like a base group for your Intune and then kind of scale down from there. So ideally, you apply this to your Intune base group. Perhaps you might want to have different types of labs configurations for different group settings. That's up to you guys to decide. You can scope that out here as you see fit. If you're not ready to sign up to anyone, you don't have to decide a group now. You just leave blank and then you can create the policy and go from there. If you have Augment, we actually have a lapse default policy, so you don't have to do that work from scratch. You can use one of our policy templates, which is great. And I mentioned the password policy. That's in. policy. So you could set the password policy as a settings. And so here you get to choose different settings here as well for the password settings. Same thing, it kind of applies multiple ways to do the same, skin the same cat. I'm trying to find the password settings. Right, yeah. So you get to choose some of the passwords you're allowed to have. Sorry, I guess the other one's a duh. I'm blanking on where we stored the password policies right now, so I'll circle back to that. But so once you have Laps implemented, what happens is if you go to devices and you select a device that has it applied, I guess I should apply to a device here. Let's go back to the configuration policy. You choose a device, you will see on the left-hand side. It might not show right away, but there will be in this field, you'll have the password options. So there'll be a lapse option for passwords. When you click on there, you can reveal the password. It rotates periodically on its own based on the expiration date you set. So it's 1 day, 10 days, 30 days. And then there's an option too as well to reset that password. Like, so let's say you have that password, you give it to the end user over the phone, they do their thing. You can from here configure the button to like cycle a new password right away, so it doesn't have to wait for that sync period. It will sync, so it changes locally on the device, and then it syncs to Intune when it checks in, which checks in every time you log in or periodically every couple hours. So that's like the way you implement Laps. It's really helpful for those use cases described. We'll kind of switch over to applications now, updating applications. So updating applications, there's various use cases of why you want to update your applications, obviously. One, when you have a new version you update, we've covered this a little bit in the previous one. So first thing we'll talk about is when you go to Windows applications to deploy an application, you can create, we've talked about the 365 apps. Within the actual configuration settings of the apps, you get to choose the update channel. So when we're going through and making a new app, you get to choose the update channel, current channel, which updates monthly. The preview channel updates monthly at the earliest availability. Enterprise channel, semi-annual. Semi-annual is the most secure, well, I shouldn't say secure, the most stable one. It only updates twice a year. So it just kind of bundles everything and does it that way. Current channels really gets the best thing. It's important to note security updates are separate from the feature updates. So you still will get the security updates even if you choose like the semi-annual. Those are kind of tied separately. So if you prefer not to update so often, the semi-annual is kind of what Microsoft grants is more stable. I feel like the monthly channel is fine. The downside of doing the semi-annual channel is if you get new features that release to Microsoft, like Word has a new feature update or whatever, you won't get that until you go to the semi-annual update. Whereas with the monthly or current channel, you get you get that right away when it comes out. I don't recommend you go for the preview channel. It's like they're still testing and they kind of have the pilot group, so that's usually where you get stuff that breaks out. You may want to have a separate deployment for a small subset of group users that use the preview channel to see those ahead of time. That's a feature you can do. And again, you scope that out in the group section of the application here. But yeah, that's how you'd update Office applications from the get-go. If you wanted to have a custom application that you've already previously deployed, like let's say we have here Zoom, and there's a new installer for it, we would go in, edit the app information, and you just select the file to update, and you would choose the new MSI file that you have downloaded already and then upload it. Important to note, if you replace the installer for an MSI or another installation, it will push out to the devices. So it's going to use these command line arguments to push that out. It may like be rough, and depending on how the software is configured, it may like, force close the application. So you might want to test it out in a small subset of groups before you roll out the whole production and kick everyone off their Zoom calls. But that's how you update the MSI for that application. In some scenarios, MSIs have like a self, like for example, in Ring Central does here, they have like a self-updating MSI, which we use in our example here. So the MSI itself will kind of like check in with Ring Central and update on its own, so you don't have to update those kind of, whoops, those installers. Anytime you can use a self-updating installer, I would highly recommend it. It just makes the overhead a lot less for you.
Hey, we have a
Uh,
lapse question that did pop in if you happen to know. So it says, what if the computer doesn't connect to the internet for a couple of days? What password will the computer have at that point? And how does IT figure it out?
yeah, so if you go to Labs, so if you go to, I don't think it'll show for us because I just pushed it out. Um, but like I mentioned, there will be kind of a password field here once the device checks in. It will show the previous password histories. So the one in Intune, even though it hasn't checked in, Intune will not rotate the password if it's not checking with the device. It only rotates the password once it checks in. So whatever you see in Labs, because that's the last time I checked in on Intune, that will be the password that's on the device. Um,
Perfect. So it needs the handshake to actually do
yeah,
the rotation.
yeah.
Awesome.
Eh, cool. And then so we covered application updates through the app portal. Now we can do
Someone asked how they get the command line argument.
the command line argument for
I
Labs.
think it's for the
Oh, for
updates.
the application
Yep.
installations? So yeah, great question. A lot of those are actually from the actual provider themselves. So Intune became more popular. Most folks have started deploying their own guides on like how to deploy with Intune. So that's where I typically get the command line arguments. I go to like, for example, for Ring Central, I went to Ring Central's guides and then look at their software deployment guides, and then they have like some example of use cases there. Same for Zoom. Zoom has a lot of good documentation for like deploying Intune. Um, so you can just like even Google search.
Yep. The answer is when you have like this cheeky little tool that's built by a guy and he's never taken Intune into consideration, you might not have that information and you might have to reach out to
Yeah,
them. Like
yeah,
it's not perfect.
yeah, but like they have pretty good documentation here for it and how to play it. But yeah, I've had it where I've had some smaller software where there is no developer anymore, and it is kind of confusing. A lot of those sometimes it's trial and error. Like I've had EXE installations where I've had to actually extract the MSI from the ESC, and a lot of times there's standard commands that work for like most, like the no restart, the QN for quiet installation. Those are typically universal, but sometimes there's little tweaks to them, and so a lot of times it was me setting up a virtual machine and then running the command line installation for this executable. The main thing to understand for if you're deploying an application for Intune, it needs to be able to silently install for it to be successful. If there's any kind of user prompts, it will not deploy properly for Intune.
Yep. And
So
not all applications support it, and then there's just no luck for that one.
yeah, all right.
Someone said, can we use MSI and EXE installers without sequencing install to create MSIX files on Intune?
So you can now we cover this in a different webinar. I'll just quickly go over it. There's this Intune, let's see where download Intune web app util you can use to kind of like package things. It makes it pretty simple. Quick demo. And when you run the utility, you choose a source folder. So if I choose this as the folder, I then choose the file. So in this case, I'm going to use this discovery agent that we have, which is an exe file. And then you choose the output folder. I can choose the same folder as I used before. I'm gonna do this previous one, just so there's no conflict. Uh, and catalog folder that's not really utilized unless using like kiosk devices, and that'll kind of package it in for an Intune Win file. That's kind of like the new solution that they used for those. It really helps. If you want to also like because you can use this for a whole folder, not a specific. I've had it where it So context is everything in this folder gets packaged into this Intune Win file. So you can have referential documents or folders or files, like maybe you have an exe that references other folders in here. It all gets packaged as this one Intune Win file. So you can have like a very complicated PowerShell deployment. I've done it for, there's a really nice one for printer driver deployments. I've done it where there's like two PowerShell scripts, and then like I have the printer drivers in here as well, and the script references the drivers, and I can silently deploy a printer to device. It's a little complicated, but once you get the template down, it's not too bad. You just kind of find the cab file and stuff like that. So it's a nice way to package things in the one executable PowerShell, and then you just upload that file. When you go to the application deployment, you just upload that into Boom file. Um, but yeah, for MSIs, you can directly upload MSIs to the application portal. It's just like line of business app. It'll take the MSIs as is, and then you just put the command line.
Cool.
Cool.
You made a fan. He's happy.
Great. Um, Yeah, so we covered application updates here. The other place you do updates is in the configuration. Go back to device, Windows, oh, sorry, device configuration, and we can create a policy for updates. So new policy, again, the kind of the main place you're going to go to is the settings catalog. Um, Edge will say, so key thing is here with the configurations, you can only right now support updating Edge and the Office suite applications. So we just look for Edge, just type in update. Should show up here. Uh, Microsoft Edge update. Yeah. So you choose what kind of updates you want. And you choose the settings of how you like, yeah, allow the defaults, allow, you got to choose all that kind of stuff that you want to have. Let users update if you want to. This one's probably gonna be the best one. Yeah, and then you got to kind of go through and filter which settings you want to control. If you want to allow rolling back to target version, allow installation, if you want to allow the preview, if you want to override the target channel. So that gets kind of controlled with the with different settings that you have. Like we talked about it in the application appointment, you can choose a target channel. So if you want, you can have allow the users to overwrite that and choose their own channel. Uh, yeah. And same thing applies for the office. So we do have some pre-made templates that I made. So the way that looks like, just I'm not going through the whole thing. You select the settings, you select the group, and these are the settings. So you can choose if the MDM wins over group policy. You have a conflict of local group policy versus the MDM. You get to choose which takes precedence. So if you set this policy into place, it will override the local group policy on the device. That's typically what you want, unless you have a conflict. If you have a hybrid environment with Active Directory, you might want group policy to take precedence. So it's a category you have to kind of choose knowing your environment. If you don't have Active Directory and Intune's your only kind of management, then typically you will want MDM to win. Some exceptions might also be if you're using an RMM to enforce group policy changes through scripting, then maybe you prefer the RMM to take precedence. So just keep that in mind. You get to control that here. And then yeah, here you guys specify like where the updates happen, locations for updates, how many days until the update happens. So by default, 0 is like right away. You can choose if there's a subset delay you want to have, like, oh, let's wait 5 days before we update it. How many the delays here, that's how you choose. Updates automatically, you can hide the options enable, all that settings are confused. Sorry, you can configure as you want and you choose the channel here. So in this case, we chose a monthly price. Same thing, I'll look at the Edge one. Like I mentioned, those are really the only two options available from the configuration panel. Same thing you have here, the option, and then you just choose a channel. There's not a lot of subsettings. We went over the subsettings in the previous one. You can choose some more minor ones, but really it's, do you want to choose a channel? And then that other policy we looked at, where you have the ability to override that if you want to. Maybe you have a subset of people you give the ability to overwrite and like go ahead and use the preview templates. But yeah, that's how you kind of control application updates through Edge, through Intune, for different applications. A lot of it mostly is going to be setting these up once, then you don't have to worry about it with the Office applications, the Edge. It's really going to be the other custom applications you have that you're going to want to monitor. And in some cases, you have an RMM. Perhaps it's easier to manage it through the RMM. If you are using the RMM to manage it, it's very important you choose and then you be diligent with it. I've had it in use cases where the RMM was used to deploy applications, but Intune is still configured. And there's a setting in here when you deploy the app, whether you get to choose the ignore app version. So if you have ignore app version set to no, Intune will always try to enforce whatever version of the application you have deployed here. This is important because if you're using an RMM to deploy Ring Central or Zoom in this scenario, let's say the RMM is deploying a newer version of Zoom, but you have ignore app version set to no, RMM pushes new installation, it's up to date, RMM looks happy, Intune detects that it's no longer the same version, it's going to overwrite that detection, that installation, and try to install this one again. So you have a back and forth. They keep going and installing on top of each other. It can be a real headache, and if you don't know what you're looking for, that's a real problem. So if you have a situation where you want the initial deployment to happen from Intune, but you want the RMM to maintain it, you would select the ignore app version. Yes, that way it just checks if it's installed and it doesn't care what version it is. That's the way you have both places. And if you want yeah, I mean, typically it's you choose how you want to do it, but that's the big caveat that catches some people. Like, I don't understand what's happening. It keeps on installing and reinstalling. That's usually the case. It's recurring. Let's see, next section into Office configurations. So, uh, and we have Office deployed, we have it updating. Now we want to set some configuration settings, make some ease of access changes to it. Instead of having to touch every device, we can kind of like create a policy en masse. So we get a configuration under applications. Then we get create a new one. I'm going to go through our demo one, just to be a little bit easier. Key thing to note here, I think you get this with Intune, but if you don't have enterprise licensing for the Office suite, you don't get all of the configuration settings. You can only control privacy settings, I think, with the business premium licensing of Intune. If you want to have all the other variations of the application configuration, policies for Microsoft 365 apps, you will have to have the enterprise version of licensing pushed out. So here we get to choose a scope, all users, specified groups. It's up to you. Like maybe you want to have a policy that applies to all users, and maybe you want to have a different policy that applies to specific groups. Like maybe accounting has specific software settings they need. You to choose. And then here you get to search through it. We covered this in a previous topic, previous webinar briefly. So I'll just kind of go over setting up a couple basic common setups here. Attach to reference. So, for example, turn off protected view. This is a pretty good one to have if you know like it's a safe thing. You can choose to do that. And it shows the application. You have one for Word, PowerPoint, Excel. You simply click on it. You get to choose manually configured and enabled. If you don't, you can leave it as the baseline, and that's like this default setting. So maybe you know for a fact, okay, I need to have Word enable the turning off the protected view for whatever reason. You trust your users that to that level, and you want that just to bypass that whole setting. You can. Uh, a common one is for macros. If you're not expecting to use macros, then you should really turn off macros. So like access, if I don't want macros running from files, disable it. And then you can do that for any applications you have. You can do some of this from device configuration settings as well, but again, multiple places do the same thing, but having everything in one place, if you're going to configure it, make sure you're configuring in one setting, not in two different places, because they can conflict. Another common setting that is used is trusted locations on network. So if you have like Access, Excel, or yeah, Excel and Access are really the main questions, main applications that use trusted locations. Like if you have a file share server that they reference, you can choose to make that a trusted location. That way you don't get like prompts when they're trying to connect every time. It can be kind of cumbersome and some automations won't work without that configuration. So you can choose to enable that. If you're doing that, you need to enable trusted location as well. You need to choose what that is. Otherwise, by default, it's not going to do anything. So let's say I have a shared drive that's like the S drive, and that's where I store all my files. Okay, I want to enable trusted locations, and I'm going to go choose to have the S drive. It's recommended to use a full network path. And if you're not, I would probably use IP addresses if you can, just because Intune can't detect that unless you set up some backend settings. But you can just use the network drive letter as well, as long as that's universal across your devices. So maybe that's what I have set up. You can choose the path for that trusted location. And as long as the computer has that path in place, then that's what it's going to choose. You can just enabled if I want just all best drive available, I can do that. Yep. And if you have multiple locations, you can set it that way. Um, Maybe some cases you want the opposite, you want to disable just locations, you can do that. Because I think by default, a user can enable it on their own. So you get to choose that like enrollment options. And those are some of the baseline settings here. Again, anything you want to do, it's pretty straightforward. You just search for it here. And then you can kind of see what is available and then, block all unmanaged add-ins. Yeah, I want that. When you're done, you hit next. It'll kind of go over your settings, like what baselines you hit. You can kind of choose to review that again and see what you configured. There's some security baseline settings that Microsoft has as like a recommendation of implementing these settings. It's a good place to start, I would say. Yeah, there's a lot of granularity control in there.
Someone specifically asked if they can change enable the setting to change display names in Teams meetings here, either set or lock, I guess.
Um,
Or is that somewhere else other than app security?
let's see. What was
Change display names in Teams.
um doesn't look like that's controlled here. That might be in team settings specifically. That would be admin center teams. I know Teams is kind of like some backend. Like Teams was kind of its own product when it was Skype, and so when it got implemented Azure or Entra ID, it does still kind of have its own admin portal which you access. And so some of the settings are kind of weird where they don't exist anywhere else in Entra, but they're only in the team section. There's still a lot of that kind of hang up with it.
Yeah, I guess it's more of a Teams configuration than a like app protection policy around Teams.
Correct. And I agree, Alex. We do not want to turn off protected view. Protected view is kind of like your safeguards, your safe railings for your end users. I I've had some cases where the staff really wanted it disabled for internal use, but I still think that even if you're in a safe location, having protected view on just saves your bacon a lot. So um, yeah. Yeah, sorry. We're talking about teams. We don't have that. Okay. Update rings. So we talked about updating applications. We talked about updating oh, get signed up. Uh, the next section we want to talk about is updating the Windows operating system itself. So just sign back in here. So I'll talk about that while I get signed back in. So we want to get our updates automatically patching. Maybe using RMO to do that. That's great. But if you're not and you're using Intune to manage it, then we'll want to set up Windows update rings. So we have to do some homework first. I'm sure most of you know you don't really want to update all your users at the same time. That could be chaotic. So we want to start with separating out those devices. So the best way to do that is creating groups. So again, we go back to groups. Groups is everything, right? So you can have different groups for deploying updates, and typically the best section is you have a test group, you have an initial adopter group, and then you have like the production group, like which is most of your end user base, and then critical systems and applications. That's kind of general best practices. So you have four different groups. However, making four groups and then constantly updating every time you get a new device, that's tedious overhead. That's kind of unscalable. So really the best way to do that is to use dynamic device groups. So we've talked about dynamic groups previously a little bit. We'll touch into a bit more, give you an example of what you want to set up, and then we'll kind of go through the update part of it. So we go to Intra, hit a new group. We're going to create a 365 group. Membership type is going to be, sorry, back to groups, all groups, new group, and 365. Dynamic device. Uh, Weird. There we go. Dynamic device group. Sorry. So dynamic device group, you gotta select it. So we'll say auto patch. We'll go with test. This is our initial test group for auto patching. So dynamic query, choose a property. We're gonna go with OS type equals Windows. This will target any Windows devices. We need to be more granular with that, so we're going to go ahead and choose next property to be sorry, what I want here. The device trust type. So we only want to target devices that are already enrolled in Azure AD, which is also Intune. So now this will be any Azure AD device that is Windows enrolled will be applied to this group. We want to be more granular than that, so we're going to also start with we want the name to start with. We decide we're going to name our devices test. Any devices that start with test are test devices that we'll use for testing this update. So here you get the rule syntax displayed. Any OS type that's Windows, Azure AD with display name starting with tests. We'll hit save and create that group. That group will take a few minutes to populate, but we'll basically do the same for four different types. Now, there's some key moments, key determination here that you have to have, like, for example, naming convention. If we're using the dynamic query we're going to start with is going to be the same for all four groups. We're going to start with device type equals Windows. And then we're going to do the trust type equals Azure AD. So this third line is really a differentiator. So you'll have to kind of choose. Typically, display name is the most common one, but that requires you to have a standard naming convention for your devices that makes sense to you and you can apply. Maybe you have like critical systems are marked with a certain naming convention. Maybe you have your main devices, just start with dev. But you want to come with three different categories on top of the test one. One is going to be for your initial adopters, like people you have like maybe application champion for each department or an initial test group. Usually it's going to comprise of 10 to 20% of your user base or device base. They get it out before anyone. If you have any complaints, that way you're not dealing with 100 or 1,000 tickets, you have a 10% of that. And then you can kind of stop the other updates until you address that, assuming you didn't catch in the test devices. Then you have your main groups. So maybe you have Another option too is you can have all you can exclude this one and then choose not equals. So maybe you just your third group is just like everyone except for critical systems. Um, does not start with maybe your devices that are critical or start with critical, whatever it is. So you kind of got to mess around with it, but you have a couple options on how to set that up. But essentially, what you end up with is four different groups. Ideally, maybe you have more, but four is typically a good starting point. Again, test group, your test users, probably your help desk users, a pilot group, some people from the general production line who you're using it, maybe ideally one from each department at minimum. So you get a good kind of like spread. And then your production, which is like 80%, 90% of your people. And then the last group is your critical systems, like your servers and such like that. Once you've created those groups, you will now go to the Intune policies. Um, we're going to go to Windows updates under devices. And here we can create update rings. So the idea here is you're going to similarly create like four different update rings, one for each group, essentially. So we'll kind of go through the one that we have configured here. So you got to choose the update types. So we want to update everything. We want to update it. We want to have feature updates. You got to choose the target version we want. Okay, we want to go to the latest and greatest. Maybe we want to hold off on the latest and greatest, and like we're only going to choose this feature update and control it that way. You can choose to include 365 updates. You do that back here again. Similarly as before, it's kind of one of those things. If you're going to do it one place, don't do it in other places. So in the previous section, we talked about doing updates through the configuration profile. If you're going to do it through the update ring, don't do it through the configuration profile. They can get kind of granular. So just choose how you want to manage it. Say maybe we uncheck those because we're controlling it through a different section. That's totally fine. But maybe we just want this one thing to control everything. So because we did the other setup, we're going to uncheck those and have those manage the updates for Edge and Office. You got to choose the approval method. Maybe you have different approval methods. You can automatically approve. You can choose a manual review response. Manual review means you get a list of all the different updates and you kind of go through and line by line approve or deny. You choose a release schedule similar to before. So you choose the deployment ring. So we have 0 days. We have 1 day. For the deferrals, they can defer it up to 1 day. So like if they get pushed to update the device right away when it comes out, they can defer it up to 1 day. You have a grace period and deadlines that you can have. You get to configure that there. But essentially what you'll do is you'll create four different categories, one for each group. So maybe your test group gets it right away, like this one's configured. Maybe your pilot group, they don't get it on the first day. They get it like on the like they get it 5 days out. You got to choose that section there. Here you got to choose if you want a scheduled install, automatically install. You can choose to give them notifications or have no notifications. It's up to you. I think best practice is notify the end user when they're about to get an update so they can plan ahead of time. Um, and then you get to choose the deferrals for each file. So you create four different categories, apply a different group. So you here you get to choose the scope tag, save. Yeah, and then you basically get to see here how it works. And that's how you would do the updates for Windows. Similarly as before, you get limited features if you have like a premium versus enterprise with the updates for the applications. So enterprise applications, they have some limited features depending on what you're doing. So just keep that in mind if you're licensing. Yeah, I think that's covered our updates. Yeah, and then best practice again, like the four different groups working policies, you create a different policy for each group, apply to different groups. In here, you can kind of control the which updates you gotta go through and see what that version is, how it's going, see the status. You can monitor the deployment status of your patching in these sections here. You can enable some alerts. You can see the driver updates and choose if you want to have specific drivers or not. Yeah, it's pretty verbose here. Once you get it deployed, you actually have some marks. So we don't have it deployed as a test environment, so we don't get to see the stuff here, but we can have profiles set up. You can create profiles as well.
Very cool. Thank you very much. So we'll just open it to the floor. If you guys have any questions for us, feel free to ask. We're happy to do our best in answering any Intune related questions, whether it's about what was, walked through today or just general stuff. We'll do our best to either answer it or get back to it. Again, this series is not about any marketing content. If you're interested in learning more about what Augment can do and where we play a role in, M365 management and security, just reach out to, book a trial through augment.com. We'll be happy to show you the app, etc. There's a question that popped up, so great. And again, keep the questions coming. We'd love to help. If you want us to keep this series going and you have specific asks, either Intune related or just general M365 training that we could walk through, we'd love to hear your thoughts as well. We're happy to continue putting this content together for you guys. Questions popping up. So reporting seems to be weak. Have you found a good tool to gain access to asset and software reporting?
For within Intune or just a tool in general, or
I suppose the
Augment?
question is a tool in general.
I feel like Augment's pretty good at that with
Yeah.
those.
I mean, we don't quite play in asset reporting yet. Obviously, we play in reporting around security and such information and user and licensing for M365 in general. I guess we don't have a good answer for you on Intune data reporting at this time, especially not from an asset and software perspective. When it comes to policy stuff, this is something we are currently building out and have some of that available in Augment today. Feel free to check that out. Reporting wise, where can you get reports of what updates failed or installed without issues? Do you know that one?
Yep. Some reports here. You can go, there's various different reports you can go through here. So if you want to look at the updates for quality updates or feature updates, you can check here. We are not deploying anything, so we don't get any kind of logs, but you would see the reports. It would show failed and which ones didn't. Uh, a good uh, a good option too is the application deployment. So if you're deploying specific software, you can also see that right from the application itself. Like when you click into an application, it's grayed out because we're not deploying anywhere, but here you would see the status, installed, not installed, failed. And if you click into it, it would give you a breakdown of like which what the status was, and you click into it, it gives you errors of what it is. But for the updates or Windows reports, you kind of go into here. It gives you more idea of what happened. Uh, yeah, in progress, not ready. I don't know if it shows the failures. I guess it's hard to tell without actually getting data in here. Yeah. But yeah, all your reports are in the support section. It's kind of annoying because it's not very like for example, device compliance. There's then like a subset of a ton of different settings within it, so it's not like super. And you kind of have to dig down and see what you're looking for.
Something Augment is about to come and cover and definitely help improve, especially from a multi-tenant perspective. One other question that came up is, could you review where the passwords were stored in labs?
Yeah, so it won't show up for us right now, but if you navigate directly to the device, because each device has its own password, on the left-hand side here, there will be a lapse or password option. I think it's recovery keys is for BitLocker, but
Yeah,
there'll be one of these sections that gets filled in. It'll just kind of like lapse password, and you kind of go through there. And then there's an option to reveal it. So
yeah, we
maybe
just have
I'll,
VMs that are down right now.
yeah, they
Maybe
haven't
we
checked.
should spin those back up.
Yeah, yeah, they're not mine, but yeah, it would show up here. Let's try and find a screenshot. That would be helpful.
And then, so someone asked, and it's a bit a longer one. Let me get through it here. So I've tried just using MS baseline policies and found the PIN requirement default to 14 character complex password that look like the default password settings you showed. Presumably they are separate settings, password versus hello for business PIN. Are they the same device policies, though?
Um, Let me read that. I don't know.
Yeah, it might be easier if you read
Oh yeah. So it is confusing because the pin is different from the Windows Hello. So Windows Hello is a typically numeric. You can do alphanumeric with it, but it does default to the characteristics. So let's see. We covered that in a different webinar. Let's see, configuration policies, I believe. Start with compliance, I think. So compliance is kind of where we can check some of that. This is where we set the checks in place of what it wants. Yeah, so password length kind of gets determined here. You can kind of compliance check that, but the configuration policy, yeah. Um, so yeah, if you want to set the pin for Windows Hello for Business, it's a specific Windows Hello for Business section of the policy under credential card or device configuration policies. Here you get to choose a pin length. The pin length is different than the password characters, but I think that answers your question. They're different device policies. You could add them to the same policies, but I typically wouldn't recommend you to do that. So the way you would do that, I guess I shouldn't show you if I don't recommend it, but
But why not?
yeah.
Live on the
In
edge.
in either case scenario, you kind of go into the device configuration policies. Create a policy, load first. Uh, Settings catalog. So some of this is in templates still. I think we had, oh, what's on there? That's okay. Settings catalog. So we have Windows Hello. You can set that setting in here. You can get more granular with what you do with Windows Hello, but again, we're going for the pin history and the pin characters. For passwords, I'm blanking on. I think I tried to find that earlier. I don't know why I'm blanking on that one, but let's see. Passwords under different policy. Device restriction. Yeah. I like to call those Microsoft minutes. A Microsoft minute is not necessarily the same as a regular minute. Uh, yeah. Yes, here, password. So here you get to choose the password settings. So it's separate from the pin. So different section. Again, keep them separate. So this is the character length. Is where you set the setting here. Character length and the password length. Yeah. So it's it's different than the It's different than the Windows Hello. Windows Hello is just for the PIN. This is the actual password setting here. And you get to choose different things as well, more kind of things, settings. But this gets once you configure this, it gets pushed to the device in the group policy. So it's like it's hard coded into the group policy. So if they even try to set a local password that doesn't match the Intune requirements, it won't work. So it's a good thing to keep in mind. I've had it where someone tried to set up a local service account on their device to run some kind of script or program, but they couldn't get the password to expire after a certain amount of days. Even though they set not expired on the device, it will expire. Intune will push it out and expire it. So it's a good thing to keep in mind.
Another question. So let's see if we can get them in before the end of the hour. Does the local password policy override Azure AD policy password? Is that what you just answered?
This the is there
Does a
sorry.
local password policy override Azure AD password policy?
Uh it's the inverse. So the local password policy will take precedence, but Intune, like initially, Intune, whenever it syncs in, it'll overwrite the local password policy. So
Gotcha.
there are scenarios where, like for example, if your end user has admin rights, which is why it's important to remove the admin rights, they could change that policy locally every so often, but every time it checks in with Intune, Intune will overwrite the local policy.
So it just creates a mess.
Yeah, it gets very complicated. So again, removing the admin rights from the end users really helps simplify the environment. But otherwise, yeah, Intune will overwrite the settings anytime it checks in. So Intune will take precedence. Some exceptions are if you have a hybrid environment where there's Active Directory, and there are specific settings for setting up hybrid environments with Azure, Intune and AD, where you get to specify what takes precedence. It's a bit more complicated setup. Perhaps I would go into at a later date, but that's very,
Yes.
very exclusive. So, um, yeah, but the answer is Intune will take precedence. But
The
the
last question we'll try to cover today here is so is there an enter Intune tool that'll find where settings is being applied, policy, configuration, etc., like GP results in Active Directory? So I would say, well, one of those tools is probably Augment from a lot of settings and policies. Um,
Yeah, so if you
Obviously,
have
I'm as an Augment employee, I don't go and try out many other tools on a daily basis.
So within actual Intune, what you can do is if you go to the device itself, you can get like um, you can get logs from here about like the different settings that apply specifically to a device. So going to the device, I can see which compliance policies are applying, which configuration policies are applying to that device specifically. Get hardware information, but this is typically where I go if I'm trying to find out why a device is having specific issues. I'll start with going here and then see like what configuration policies are applied. A lot of times here you can see conflicts get outlined, right? Like here, like oh, there's a conflict here, and if you click into it, it'll tell you kind of where that conflict lies. And here it goes line by line of what each thing is happening and which one's working, which one's not applying, and then which one has a potential conflict. This one, apparently backup directory is not set up. Is what I would guess. You can click into it and then you get more details of that error code that you can research. But yeah, so similar to like what you're saying, you said GP results in AD. This is kind of it's more device specific. I don't think there's one for the whole tenant because it can get very convoluted. Because in theory, you can have a very complicated Intune setup. I've had it where there's a tenant really should have separated into two or three tenants at some point, but the business had grown so much that they had like two different, very different departments. Like one part of the organization is doing one thing, another one is doing a different thing. But they wanted to save on licensing costs and also be able to share their calendar still. So they were all in one tenant. And so some policies would apply to like tenant, like essentially group A, and they were very different for group B. Group A was like more strict about certain things, and group B had need to have more control because of the developers they had and staff. So they had very wildly varied configuration policies. And so it's kind of it'd be a mess because if they were just applied to like the same base groups in that scenario, you would have conflicts everywhere. But yeah, specifically, if I want to go device, I would click in the device and I go to the configuration prompt. This is where I start for troubleshooting. The same thing for application configurations if you have it specifically applied. It's kind of your go-to device, navigate to the device and kind of see all the stuff that's affecting it here.
Thank you. So we're seeing people drop off, probably because it's the top of the hour and they're jumping into other meetings. So thank you, everyone. We hope this was useful to you. We're happy to do more sessions like this. So If you didn't get feedback in today on what you'd like to see in the future, just shoot us an email. We'd be happy to take that back and create more sessions for you guys. Thanks for attending.
Yeah.
Bye.